The stakes here are not abstract. Let's say you have an AI model that produces your underwriting memo, or maybe it's a market comparison or some sort of sensitivity analysis, and a member of your team passes it on to you. The moment that that output leaves that person's desk, it becomes a human decision. You are liable for that AI generated output. The model is not on the hook. You are, and your firm is. So meet your new colleague. They have zero accountability. They're ruled by probability. They're 100% confident no matter what they're telling you, even when they're hallucinating. Okay. This is the colleague that we're now working with every single day. In January, based on formal research, a working paper was published by the Wharton School, which documented human behavior when interacting with AI. One of the things that it keyed in on was whether we as humans would follow wrong advice when it was given to us by AI. Before I reveal their findings, I want you to just jot down on a piece of paper what you think was the percentage of the subjects that followed faulty advice from the AI. 80%. 80% of the subjects in a formal study by the Wharton School followed faulty advice and without any time pressure. This is the most critical finding in AI workplace research to date. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for making some time this afternoon. Over the next 40 minutes, I want to walk you through a problem that almost every investment firm has now, that almost no one's measuring, and that's quietly reshaping the quality of decisions on your transactions. I'm not here to sell you a tool. I'm here to talk about what happens after the tool that you're already using produces an answer. And whether the human on the other side, whether it be you or a teammate, can tell when that answer is wrong. For those of you who I haven't met and aren't familiar with me, I am Bruce Kirsch, founder of Real Estate Financial Modeling. I've been working to help equip professionals in commercial real estate and help them accelerate their careers for 20 years. And I've been very fortunate to work with a tremendous number of bright, motivated, driven individuals and firms. And I am also the head of real estate software for Actis AI. And that position informs a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So let's start first with the stakes, because the stakes here are not abstract. Let's say you have an AI model that produces your underwriting memo, or maybe it's a market comparison or some sort of sensitivity analysis, and a member of your team passes it on to you. The moment that that output leaves that person's desk, it becomes a human decision. Okay, so you, if you're the recipient, you are liable for that AI generated output. The model is not on the hook. The analyst is who passed it to you is not on the hook. You are, and your firm is. Okay, and so here's where it's uncomfortable. Unfortunately, we're wired as humans to trust fluent, confident, and well-structured language. And that's exactly what these AI models produce, what they were engineered to produce to perfection. And it's what they produce even when they're wrong. So meet your new colleague. They have zero accountability. They're ruled by probability. They're 100% confident no matter what they're telling you, even when they're hallucinating. Okay. This is the colleague that we're now working with every single day. In January, based on formal research, a working paper was published by the Wharton School, which documented human behavior when interacting with AI. One of the things that it keyed in on was whether we as humans would follow wrong advice when it was given to us by AI. Before I reveal their findings, I want you to just jot down on a piece of paper what you think was the percentage of the subjects that followed faulty advice from the AI. Let's see what it was. 80%. 80% of the subjects in a formal study by the Wharton School followed faulty advice and without any time pressure. This is the most critical finding in AI workplace research to date. In part because it's telling us the problem is not stress and it's not speed. The problem is that intelligent, credentialed individuals like you defer to confident output, and like me, because we're all equally human. So the question is no longer whether your team and you are exposed to this pattern. The question is by how much? The second major finding from the research matters because it tells us that trust in AI is not a neutral personality trait. It changes outcomes. The Wharton result was not simply that some people accepted bad advice. It was that the people who trusted AI more had 3.5 times greater odds of following faulty advice when the AI gave them a wrong recommendation. Okay, that's a very different risk profile from ordinary human error. Ordinary error tends to be visible in the form of hesitation, disagreement, or some messy chain of reasoning. AI-assisted error is arriving to us wrapped in supreme confidence, beautiful structure, and with intoxicating speed. So the problem is not that you or analysts in general are careless. The problem is that the more comfortable we become with the tool, the easier it becomes for us to stop treating the output as something that still needs to be examined. So high trust effectively becomes high exposure when it's not paired with disciplined verification. So this is the first organizational warning sign that adopting these AI systems alone is not readiness. It's simply exposure. The third and last finding that I'll talk about from the Wharton study is the one I find most important for investment teams because it gets at what happens after an analyst has used AI to produce an answer. The study from Wharton found that confidence in wrong answers increased for the people who used AI to generate them. In other words, the tool did not merely influence the conclusion, it influenced the analyst's confidence in the conclusion. That's dangerous because confidence is contagious inside a deal process and a deal team, right? A confident analyst is going to write a cleaner memo. A cleaner memo is going to move faster, potentially through a review. A faster review will give the IC less friction. They may pose fewer questions, and there may be fewer moments where someone pauses long enough to challenge one or more important premises. Okay, this is how faulty analysis scales. It's not through obviously bad work, but through polished work that feels more credible because the AI helped produce it. So the professional risk is no longer just getting the answer wrong. The risk is becoming more certain precisely when the evidence should make you less certain. Why on earth do we do this? Why do we act this way? The answer is not a lack of intelligence or a lack of paying attention. Okay. It's that literally these AI systems were engineered to press directly on several hardwired cognitive biases that we have as humans and to do it all at once. Okay. Fluency, for example, makes an answer feel more true because it's easy to read. Consistency makes it feel more rigorous because the story holds together from paragraph to paragraph. Precision makes it feel measured because the numbers look exact. Confidence makes it feel reviewed because the model doesn't sound uncertain. And last, automation bias nudges us to assume that a conclusion generated by a system has somehow passed through a more objective process than a human draft in a human process. So individually, each of those biases is pretty manageable, but together they create a very persuasive package. And that's why the issue is not solved simply by telling ourselves or telling analysts to be careful, right? Careful people are still humans and they're still therefore vulnerable to fluency, consistency, precision, and confidence in outputs. So the discipline that we need to adopt needs to be procedural. We need to slow the answer down, identify what evidence there is that supports it, and force the judgment back into view. This needs to be a deliberate approach. So this is something subtle that AI has removed from analytical work, which we probably, most of us, have never thought of. It's the texture of errors when humans produce work, okay? When we draft a paragraph and it reads kind of rough, right? To someone who's analyzing that or receiving that analysis, that is a signal that, well, maybe they were struggling on wrapping their head around how to articulate the friction in the market or something of that nature. Okay. Hedging. We do hedging in our language, in our body language, in our tone of voice. That tells us where evidence was incomplete. We also tend to, as humans, make mistakes in clusters, right? Maybe it's the ninth tab of tenant analysis out of 10, where you've checked everything very diligently in tabs 1 through 8. And then on by tab 9, you're just so mentally exhausted that you tend to miss some mistakes. And then those same mistakes roll over into tab 10. Okay. Even signs of effort, crossing out things with a pen, strange ways of transitioning from one part of your argument to another, things that you don't fully reconcile, those things give reviewers of your work clues about where to probe. And the longer that you work with a particular analyst, the more you know their signature for these are the places where I really need to depress on them to make sure that we're all buttoned up. Okay. AI output by design smooths all of this away. There is zero texture to the results that it gives us. Okay. It can be totally wrong without sounding out uncertain. It doesn't hedge. It doesn't have a different tone. It can skip a step without leaving any sort of visible gap. It can invent, fabricate a bridge between two facts and present that bridge in the same polished tone as everything else. And so we are essentially the reviewer. And so we have lost all of those normal signals that something potentially deserves additional scrutiny. And so this is why AI-assisted review cannot rely on style cues, right? A clean memo now is no longer evidence of clean reasoning. The reviewer needs to examine the lineage, the provenance of those claims, those data points, the assumptions. They need to look carefully on the logic. Do we have full coverage of this problem? You need to be able to step out of tendencies, your biases as a human, and again, deliberately start to press on these things because we don't have any texture anymore to give us a clue. I want to introduce three important concepts, and some of you probably know quite a bit about this already, so I'll keep it relatively brief. But some of these may be new to some of you. So how did we get here? Let's just pause for a moment. How did we get to this place where we are all intelligent, driven, educated, and ambitious? And we're sitting here similar to how for decades we sit and wait for Excel to finish calculating so we can see an output. Now we find ourselves sitting here waiting for Claude or Gemini or GPT to finish its quote unquote thought process and deliver us some sort of output, some answer. Okay, how on earth did we get here? So let's just dial the clock back for a moment. Go back about 10 years. Now, that was the point at which computing power became robust enough that people who had long exposure and an interest in the idea of artificial intelligence said, you know what, I think we may be at a place where it's now feasible to build something that could potentially, eventually converge upon what is known as AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now, neural network theory and artificial intelligence have been around since the 1960s. Okay, most of you on this call probably weren't even yet alive in the 1960s. It's always been, since then, a known discipline, but mostly theoretical. So go back about 10 years. Now we have GPU, graphic processing units, that are incredibly powerful. And ironically, they were optimized so that we didn't have lag in our video games, but they're so good at that sort of parallel processing of information, which reduces the lag in the graphics, that they actually are perfectly suited to simultaneous multiple calculations that are the basis of this neural networking. And so we had several groups, as you all know. OpenAI, splintered off of or OpenAI, and then Anthropic splintering off, and then we have Meta, and then we have Google, and other players elsewhere in the world. They all started to pursue this idea of the pursuit of artificial general intelligence. And they chose a large language model as sort of the nucleus for this pursuit. And so a large language model is exactly that. It's an ingestion of a massive corpus of knowledge. And so effectively, what all of these players did was they went out and they said, we are going to consume the entirety of the published knowledge in the world, literally. Since publishing was a thing, we're going to consume every bit of information. And what we're going to do is we're going to train these models to be able to respond to queries that are coming from humans in a way that is useful. Now, the core of how these models work is through probability. And so when you get a response back, what you're getting back is a very highly processed guess on the part of the model as to what the sequence of words should be in response to what you gave it in terms of a prompt. There's a lot of technical basis to this, but it's essentially betting based on the words that have preceded the current word, what the current word should be. And then what should the next word be based on that sequence of words that have been put in place. Okay. There's no one home. Let's just be totally honest. There is no soul. There is no real intelligence. This is a probability machine. Okay. No one's home. No one's behind this. Okay. It's a roulette wheel of fragments of words. Okay. And so this is the first thing that we need to just wrap our heads around, is that there is no real intelligence. It's an incredible technology. Okay. But we need to remember that what's coming back to us from the machine is just a marvel of computing power, and the fact that all of these players who are pursuing this eventual goal of artificial general intelligence, they all committed the greatest theft in the history of the world. All of them. Because they all went out and said, copyright be damned, intellectual property rights be damned. We are literally going to ingest every single printed word, right? Every issue of the New York Times ever, every Encyclopedia Britannica, and on and on and on. Every research paper that came out of Wharton and Harvard and so on related to commercial real estate, every conceivable printed word. It's absolutely stunning. And they said, you know what? The payoff here is so potentially large that, yeah, we're going to get sued, but it's just going to be a line item in our operating pro forma is settlements. It's just going to be a line item. And we'll have so much wealth that it's really not going to make any difference. So here's what we talked about in the email that came out regarding this. Okay. This is a simulated distribution of IRRs on a single OM using the exact same prompt. I ran this experiment with a group of master's students, and I gave them an OM to upload to the AI of their choice, the model of that AI of their choice. And I gave them a prompt. I said, use this prompt verbatim, and then tell me what your IRR is in your base case. Tell me what the purchase price is. Okay. And so we have this just stunning spread, right? A 54-point spread of what the quote unquote base case IRR is. So what's causing this variance? Well, we had 30 independent chat sessions, 30 independent runs that interpreted this OM and fabricated the assumptions that it needed to fabricate in order to build a living, breathing investment analysis that produced an IRR. Okay, the second thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of, there is, for every one of these models that comes out, what's known as a training cutoff date. Okay? Every one of these models is trained on a finite snapshot of the world, right? That ends at a specific point in time. So the one that's being talked about the most right now is Fable 5 from Anthropic. Fable 5 has a training cutoff date of January of 2026. Okay. That's when they closed the gates on the information that it could ingest. And then they trained it and fine-tuned it and so on, such that it could come out last month. Okay. it doesn't know effectively what happened past January of 2026. It has zero knowledge of it. Now, you're probably thinking, yes, but they have connection to the internet. That doesn't necessarily automatically solve the problem. Okay, when you have an AI that's going out to the web, it's retrieving snippets of information. It's not necessarily verifying anything. It's not necessarily checking dates, and it's not necessarily ranking reliability. And that's information that's going in to the context. Okay, it's not hardwired into the weightings of the training data, the corpus of knowledge. And so you could get an old market comp pulled from the web, an old interest rate, a cap rate from a totally different site, or a tenant default, have information that we're leaning on, like lease comps and rent growth and so on. Okay. So if the model, and this is the case for all of us, if our model is answering us primarily from a world that stopped 6 months ago, right? Its conclusions can be internally perfect to its world, which ended 6 months ago, but externally wrong. So the diagnostic question here is, what happened after the model's knowledge ended? And have I given it the correct context now? And have I independently verified the facts that matter most to this decision? Okay, here's the last one. All of these models advertise the size of their context windows. Okay, 100,000 tokens, 200,000 tokens. I think Gemini advertises 1 million tokens. What does that mean, right? A token is sort of the unit of knowledge, so to speak. That number tells us how much text we can, not physically, but how much text we can stuff into a prompt, okay? It doesn't tell us how much of that text the AI can reliably reason about at one time, okay? Just like we have gross rents and we have net effective rent, we have this effective context window, okay? That's the portion that the model actually attends to, can retrieve, and use. And I'm very lucky to work with a tremendous number of PhDs at Actis AI, and their estimation is that the effective context window is about 10% of the advertised context window. Okay, so picture you or an analyst on your team dragging into Claude an OM, a rent roll, lease abstracts, market reports, environmental study, loan docs, and prior IC memos. You drop that into a single chat, right? And then you say, give me a synthesized recommendation. Okay, the model will sincerely try, it will sincerely try to consider all of what you just stuffed into the chat in concert with the entirety of the knowledge of the world that it was trained on through 6 months ago. It will try its best. And when it gives us the response, it's going to sound like it read absolutely everything and that it processed absolutely everything. Okay, but little things matter. The details of a lease clause matter when there's, for example, a tenant default or some footnote that defines how the DSCR is calculated. What is NOI exactly in that definition of DSCR? Okay, those pieces of information could be at token position 53,000, right? And the model is effectively paying attention more so to the beginning of what you gave it and to the end of what you gave it, okay? And so when we're doing these back up the truck type of dumps of data, big leases, big loan docs, and so on, hundreds of pages essentially in one go, we need to say, given everything that I just made available and told it to consider and to understand precisely which pieces of what I gave it is it actually using, right? And which critical facts perhaps got buried. And it's not going to tell us that. It's going to give this perfectly confident response. Okay. So, what should we make of all of this? Okay. The first thing is using an AI, or what we'll call tool fluency, is not the same thing as decision reliability. Okay. We cannot treat them as the same thing. Okay. There's a ton of people out there helping you craft the perfect prompt. And this is, tutorial videos on this is how you use cowork to do this, and this is how you string together agents and so on. And that's fantastic. And a lot of that stuff is terrific. Highly useful. But none of that's sufficient, because none of it, which is all in the sort of the input interaction with the AI, none of that changes what happens when we receive the polished output that is incorrect. Okay. What determines outcomes on a deal is what information's reliable, okay, given the evidence behind it. How can we detect where reasoning that was chained together in the LLM has a gap, or something was skipped, or two steps essentially in reasoning were skipped? Okay. We need to be able to calibrate our own human confidence to the quality of the underlying data, not to the polish of the presentation. Okay. And we need to maintain our own cognitive independence when the machine is giving us something that sounds totally certain. And by the way, everyone else is inclined to agree with it because of all of these biases that we have hardwired into our brains. Okay. No one is teaching about this. No one is addressing the skill of judgment as it relates to assessing AI outputs. Okay. This is the thesis of the entire AI decision readiness idea. Okay. We're teaching an evaluative discipline. It matters because you can be in the top 1% at your company of crafting the perfect prompt. You can know every keyboard shortcut, every advanced feature, everything about, oh, this model is best for this model is best for that. But nothing in your training has ever asked you to interrogate the output that sounds right. Okay, the 80% finding from Wharton is not a finding about people who were bad with AI. It's a finding about people who were very fluent with AI. Okay, so that's what makes this super uncomfortable. Okay, until the evaluative gap is closed, every additional hour you and your team spend getting better at using AI may actually be increasing your exposure rather than reducing it, because a more fluent user of a flawed output produces a more persuasive memo. A more persuasive memo makes it actually harder, not easier, for the next reviewer in the chain to catch that error. Okay. We cannot consider closing that gap optional. This is where we are in time here. This is where we are and how we need to evaluate our own work. Okay. So I want to give you a few things that you can use, whether or not you're interested in pursuing this credential. I'm going to give you some valuable, helpful things right now that you can put to work right after this webinar. Okay. These are 5 patterns that we see again, again, and again that cause intelligent, driven folks like you to follow faulty output without noticing. These are not edge cases. These are not exotic things. These are ordinary presentations of wrong answers that sound super plausible. Okay. So I'm going to step through these. For each of them, I'm going to do three things. I'll describe the pattern. I'll give you a concrete example from a commercial real estate context. And I'll give you a single diagnostic question, one question short enough to remember that can neutralize this danger. Okay. This section here, this is adapted directly from a mini assessment that we have on the website. Okay. It's the same evaluative framework that the AIDR certification examines against in a scenario-based format at a lot more rigorous depth. If you take nothing else from this session, take these 5 diagnostic questions, print them out, put them next to your computer monitor. They will more than repay the time that you've invested in today's session. Okay, red flag number 1, precision without provenance. Okay, so let's say that you're an analyst, you ask an AI for an as-is valuation for a stabilized office property. Comes back at 47,218,000, so on and so forth. You ask for a more conservative cap rate assumption, and it returns this other super precise number. Okay. You stress test the exit cap, and it returns something materially lower in the $42 million range. Okay. All of these numbers instill tremendous confidence because of their precision. Okay. They make the output feel audited. And every time we refine it, we feel even more confident in it. Okay. Iterative refinement is not independent verification. Okay. The AI is still making these calls based on its training, based on what you stuffed into the context window. Okay. You're essentially just watching precision compound on a foundation that is unchecked. Okay. So the diagnostic question here is, was this number re-derived from first principles, or was it just re-anchored from a flawed initial solve? Okay, number 2, convergence without independence. Let's say you think you're being extra cautious and extra clever. You say, well, let me run this in Claude, and let me run it in GPT, and let me also run it in Gemini. Okay, so you drop the same things into those 3. And you get effectively the same result. Okay, so all 3 of them are going to converge within some sort of 2%, very tight clustered band. Okay, that makes you more confident. That makes your team more confident. Okay, well, we did it in 3 AIs, right? And they all basically said the same thing. Okay, this seems like a super rigorous approach. And the intent there obviously is the right intent. But the trap here is that all of these models have overlapping training distributions. Therefore, they also share blind spots with one another. Okay, these are correlated outputs coming from correlated inputs, right? They're all training on the world's knowledge. They're all training on, all the articles that are in the Institutional Real Estate Investor magazine and the PRIA research. They're all using the same source material. Okay. So the question here is, do these systems share this training ancestry? And the answer is most likely yes, because all of these platforms are trying to essentially reproduce human intelligence. And the foundation for that is to consume all of the smart things that have ever been concluded and published. Okay, number 3, coherence without coverage. So imagine a memo you have to write for an industrial acquisition. Okay, you ask the AI to help you. It gives you some demand projections, competitive map, regulatory summary, and some sensitivity analysis, right? And all of those sections support the buy recommendation that it ends up giving. Okay, the narrative is smooth, all of the logic's internally consistent, and you pass it on to a colleague and it looks legit and it's persuasive, okay? The trap here is that fluency is not the same thing as completeness, okay? These LLMs, as we said, they are designed, they're engineered to produce beautiful prose, coherent answers. They are not designed to warn you about what they left out or the fact that they really couldn't process all the information that you stuffed into them in the prompt, okay? So the diagnostic question here is, what would contradict this recommendation? And is that contradictory element absent because it's wrong or because it was invisible to the model? Okay, couple more real quick. Confidence without calibration. You've got a $340 million portfolio acquisition going to investment committee. You ran Monte Carlo on it. It has a 94.2% probability of meeting your hurdle. Okay, the underwriting memo is fantastic, very thorough, right? Every stage of that memo was reviewed by your chain of analysts and associates. The problem here is the decimals feel like science, okay? And so the trap here is that the decimals sort of doing the work that judgment should be doing, right? We need to be reviewing as humans at each step along the way. We cannot allow this precision to be a substitute for independent calibration. Okay, so the takeaway here is that we need to match our confidence in outputs coming from AI to the quality of the evidence, again, not to the polish of the presentation. Last one, fluency without verification. Okay, a sophisticated AI gives us a detailed valuation memo, right? You run that same prompt a few days later, and you get a meaningfully different result. Okay, but both memos are well written and polished, and they both sound equally authoritative. Okay, this trap is straightforward, but it's the most consequential of these five. Okay, if the tool that you're depending on cannot reproduce its own answer, right? What you have is a coherent fabrication, and a coherent fabrication is still a fabrication. It's the coherence of it that makes it hard to catch. Okay, so just because something can be reproduced doesn't mean that it's correct. So you could have agreement or you could have disagreement. If the five questions we talked about before are too many, here it is boiled down to just three. And incidentally, I'm happy to share these slides on the back end. So reach out to me. Here's how you can put this to work Monday, tomorrow, perhaps. Let's say you get an AI generated memo for multifamily. It's put together well, it's consistent with your firm's standard model, and it's going to go to IC in a few days. Before you present it, you need to ask these three questions here, okay? Which assumptions were in the training data and which are from this deal? If I had asked yesterday, would the answer have been the same? And is my confidence in the output here calibrated to my evidence or to its fluency? Okay. Now, notice these questions do not require a computer science degree. They do not even require that you have a subscription to Claude. They don't require any technical training. But what they do require is evaluative discipline, okay? The willingness to interrogate this fluent output before you put your name on it. Right? That's the entire thesis of the certification, okay? What we've talked about is just a sample. It's a single chapter, so to speak, from this AIDR certification, which is vendor neutral, incidentally. So everything that we teach is agnostic to whether you use primarily Claude or GPT or Gemini or whatever. Okay. It's a systematic framework for professional decision making in the age in which we're now living. It doesn't teach you how to run prompts. It's teaching you disciplined judgment so that when an output's unreliable, you see it, you catch it before the committee does, before your capital partner does. The certification exam, which includes the prep, is $299. Like everything that we've done over the last 20 years, there is discounted pricing for students, $179, and for present and former U.S. military. You get the retake if you need it. The credential's good for 3 years because we are going to have to keep pace with all these changes that are happening with AI, and it's going to need to be retooled eventually to stay on track. Here's the website. You can register for an individual seat. If you are interested in a team deployment, send me an email here, AIDR@getrefm.com. Okay. If you're going to take one thing away from this session, just know that AI is not going to slow down. Okay. So the professionals who are going to evaluate it, who can evaluate it calmly and rigorously and on the record because they're accountable for it, those professionals are going to be the ones that their firms trust with capital decisions. And this is a certification that provides a credential for that discipline. Okay. The working definition here is revolving around three operative verbs: evaluate, validate, and act on AI-assisted analysis. Okay. Without surrendering your judgment. This discipline is the refusal to outsource your conclusion to the AI. The AI has no expectation of accountability, and it will never have any accountability. Okay. So when there's capital being considered to be put at risk, this is just so critical. And so we have 6 disciplines that we walk through in the prep for the certification. None of this is theoretical. Every one of these that you see here maps directly onto moments in a real deal where if you're using AI to assist in your analysis, that AI could potentially have broken down, and it's up to you to proactively be a detective and figure out just how much confidence you should put in what it gave you back. Okay, so what would you be able to do after you have gone through this prep and taken the exam? Okay, you can spot when a coherent piece of analysis is resting on something flawed. You can surface when something that the model skipped or glossed over. You know when to trust an output and when you should dig deeper. Okay. You can calibrate your confidence based on evidence, not on presentation, fluency, and polish. And you can preserve your independent judgment when the AI is persuasive, and you have the confidence to defend your conclusion to stakeholders. Okay? Even when those stakeholders are being biased in the way that we are prone to be biased. Okay. Every one of these is a professional skill. These are not software skills. This is not how do I write the perfect prompt. It's a judgment skill, right? Applicable on the very next time that you're going to interact with AI related outputs. Here's how it works. there's an examination. It's online, available 24/7. It's scenario-based. You get instant results. The credential is good for 3 years. The prep is relatively light, but very important and an eye-opener, really, for a lot of people. The prep is about 6 to 8 hours across 10 written modules, covering the core disciplines that we walk through and going deeper. If you don't happen to pass on your first attempt, not everybody does, there's a complimentary retake within 60 days. Okay. It's not tool training. We're not teaching you how to use any particular software or AI model. You don't even need to have a paid subscription. Deliberately, it is an examination and a putting in place of a structure for evaluative judgment. Okay. It's probably for those who are on this call, right? You're in high stakes environments. You're dealing with potential capital commitments on the equity side, on the debt side, and you're accountable for information that is used as the basis for making capital commitments. Now, for employers, it becomes even more pronounced and even more important. Okay. So if your analyst team is prone to follow faulty advice 80% of the time, right, even without time pressure, right, that's not a technology problem that you have. You can't solve that by buying, access to a better model, right? This is an evaluative discipline problem, and it's measurable then, right? And that's the whole point here, is that we can put together for your team through this credential testing a cognitive risk map for your organization. And what this does for your team is it turns that Wharton statistic into something that's actionable as a management decision. There'll be an executive summary, calibration score across the team, cognitive fragility reading, right? How often judgment is going to collapse under persuasive output. Okay. And the point is not the absolute numbers on any single team. The point is that these are numbers. They've been made into quantities. Okay. These are no longer impressions of, do I think so-and-so has highly nuanced, reliable, broad judgment. It's not about these things. It's not an impression anymore. It's something that is quantifiable. There'll be a scatter plot analysis that's showing you, right? Do I have people on my team that are highly confident when they're wrong? Or do I have people on my team who are more likely to be right, but actually have low confidence? Okay, these are things that you can then act on in your management. Okay, the distribution of confidence across the team. If you have a huge bunching of high end of on the high confidence end, right? You would think on the face of it that that's what you want, but you also need to be careful that you may have a team that's on the path towards no longer questioning the outputs of AI. Okay. And then a bias clustering analysis as well, right? This gives you as a manager the ability to look across your team and pinpoint where the weaknesses are, where you can address and get your team members to work to their potential. Okay. And what this can contribute to is not a performance review, but really a decision readiness review. Okay. And this is something that is actionable. Let me just close out the details on the examination, right? It's judgment and evaluation focused. Literally, there's no math. Literally, there are no spreadsheets. So it's a very different type of thing. It's all about judgment. Um, as we said, it's all vendor agnostic. So we're not saying you're using flawed. We're just saying an AI produces X. It doesn't really matter. It's applicable across all the models. Um, you get it, your results instantly. And the questions are specifically designed to mirror the real errors that AI models are producing every single day for many of us. Okay, if you're looking at this potentially on behalf of a team, right? The organizational registration is going to unlock some additional benefits. You could have coordinated scheduling, aggregated reporting, like we showed with the cognitive risk map elements, calibration analysis, showing the distribution of confidence versus accuracy among your team members, and the executive briefing that's summarizing the findings and allowing you to decide what your next steps should be as far as a manager. The certification exam, which includes the prep, is $299. Like everything that we've done over the last 20 years, there is discounted pricing for students, $179, and for uh, present and former U.S. military. You get the retake if you need it. The credential's good for 3 years because we are going to have to keep pace with all these changes that are happening with AI, and it's going to need to be retooled eventually to stay on track. Here's the website. You can register for an individual seat. If you are interested in a team deployment, send me an email here, AIDR@getrefm.com. Okay. If you're going to take one thing away from this session, just know that AI is not going to slow down. Okay. So the professionals who are going to evaluate it, who can evaluate it calmly and rigorously and on the record because they're accountable for it, those professionals are going to be the ones that their firms trust with capital decisions. And this is a certification that provides a credential for that discipline. Thank you very much for your time today. I'm always happy to take questions over email. I know we went a little bit over the scheduled time, so I'm going to respect your time and say, reach out to me over email and we can talk some more. Hope this was helpful. Thank you.